Good. Very nice to see you. Warm welcome. I'm very excited for a lot of reasons. The first one is didn't really expect so many people because of the strong competition we have from the weather. I was just cycling back from home through Vondel Park, and it was really crowded. But maybe I shouldn't talk too much about Vondel Park, otherwise you're all going to leave. The second reason is that we are kicking off today our lecture series, brand new lecture series on what is the Anthropocene. And that is nice because it's the start of the semester. We're all fresh and energized, and we're really interested in what is actually this concept that everyone uses and few people probably understand. And we're also really excited because today is also the day that we will inaugurate our fellowship of the Anthropocene. We have a distinguished fellowship at the VU, and we have actually the first fellow, Sjoerd Kluiving, here, and we will introduce you in a minute. So I'm also very happy and excited about that. My name is Philipp Pattberg. I'm the director of the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute. ASI is the VU's interdisciplinary and interfaculty platform for research on sustainability, from the law faculty to the theologians and the betas and everything in between. And one of our tasks is to organize exciting debates so that everyone learns more about the VU and that we at the VU learn more about these interesting topics. Good. We will talk about the whole lecture series and what we will do today in a minute. But before that, allow me just a couple of sentences about why in 2023 we still need a lecture series on the Anthropocene. Because those of you that are a bit more familiar, this debate isn't really new. I think it is 23 years ago at least, since the late Paul Crutzen, it's an urban legend, I guess, suggested the term at a conference, and he, I think, got up. At least that's what I read from his seat, wherever that was. Let's imagine in the last row, he got up. Paul Crutzen, chemist and a Nobel Prize winner, and he said, I think we need a new term to describe the way we humans affect the planet. That's how I would say it. Maybe he said it a bit better. And he said, why don't we say the Anthropocene? Now, everyone was a bit skeptical. What does that mean? The age of men. But it stuck. He wrote an article in a newsletter and many articles and books and whatnot followed, professorships, distinguished fellowships, and all the shebang. And now 23 years later, we're discussing it still. It is not an official term of geology, and we will hear more about that, but it's maybe close. I'm not sure if that's true, but at least we have a really vibrant debate about it. So we thought it's good to dive into that. But beyond those general curiosity that we have as scientists, there's also a deeper reason why we still need to talk about the Anthropocene. And that is, I'll try to explain it quite shortly, that so far, mostly we have disciplinary perspectives. So if you're a lawyer, or like me, a political scientist, or you study tourism, everyone, and I guarantee you, if you Google it's correct, they write a book, X and the Anthropocene. And I did actually the same, very guilty, so I edited the book, and it's called The Anthropocene Debate and Political Science. And this is really great. And then we have artists and people make music, and everyone looks at it and uses this and comments it. But what we're lacking is a bit of debate between the disciplines. And we have that sometimes, but often it goes amiss. And I will tell you a little story about that in a second. Maybe just for the background of the story. A couple of weeks ago, there was a news that finally we agreed on roughly when the Anthropocene started. So the mid-20th century, and we have found a place where we can actually scientifically show that. Not everyone really agrees with that, but there's now a lake in Canada, I believe, and you can go down, get some sediments, and you can see what we did since, let's say, the 1950s, right? See plastics there, you find maybe remnants of CFCs and nuclear testing. I don't know, I'm not an expert, a political scientist, but that's how I imagine it. And everyone was very excited and said, now we found a GSP and a global, a golden spike, a place where we can show that. Now, this is the context for my little story. One of the members of the Anthropocene working group, that's the people who for 20 years think about it. Well, how long? It's 14, 15, but a long time they think about it. Ellis, he said, I have to step down. And he wrote a letter and got a lot of publicity because his argument is really remarkable. And I will read it out in a second. So he is a professor at Cornell, so he's not anyone, and he was sitting there in this working group for 14 years and discussing with his colleagues back and forth, and now he said, I have enough, I'm gone. It's like, wow, why? What happened? Okay, quote. To define the Anthropocene as a shallow band of sediment in a single lake is an esoteric academic matter. but dividing Earth's human transformation into two parts, pre and post 1950, does real damage by denying the deeper history and the ultimate causes of Earth's unfolding social environmental crisis. End of quote. And what he tries to say here is that actually this is political. Because if you say, as some people argued, that we always altered our environment, so it's not really news, then you might say, okay, so what? But if you say it's in 1950, you also say something. And that is what Ellis continues in his remark. He said, maybe we overlook the deeper political exclusions that happened to actually get to 1950. What he means here is obviously the history of colonialism, for example, that has a huge impact on the way we today think about the world, how we live, and why we have so much emissions. Good. Why do I say that? Because it is a good example for what we need more. We need more debates among the disciplines, social sciences, the natural sciences, everyone to really understand what the Anthropocene can be. And I don't really care if they agree or not. This doesn't matter because it's in the world anyway. Now, in short, our lecture series try to dive deep and we try to pair people who have different perspectives and can hopefully have a meaningful conversation. By the way, if you don't like the term at all, it's fine. There are also alternatives. Maybe the two that I like most. One is the Capitalocene, right? Someone says, oh, capitalism. And that wasn't Karl Marx, it was a different guy. And the other I like even more, and I found that is the Cthulhucene. Yeah. Those of you who are a fan of H.P. Lovecraft know that he wrote stuff about that. But that's not why it's called like this. It actually refers to ancient goddesses and gods that are revered by indigenous populations. So, however we call it, it's a fantastic debate. And I'm very, very excited that we have real experts talking about it today. And I will hand over. But the experts have to remain silent for 2 or 3 more minutes, because first of all, I want to introduce to you Nele van den Bongert, who is the managing director of ASI, and you will hand over, introduce our lecture series, our fellow, and our guest speaker of today. Thanks again for coming, and I hope you enjoy today. And please come back because there are more lectures. Thanks a lot. Nele, close yours.
Yes, thank you all for coming and for being here. So yeah, as you can see, we have more plans. So every 2 weeks, you can book your Tuesday nights, except for one, which is a Monday. But yeah, we hope to see you back. We'll talk about different areas. So we start today with an introduction, and then we go into the transition discussion, and then we dive into different areas where this discussion transition has to take place. And we finish with a debate on the new economy. So that's going to be exciting, I guess. Why we do this? Oh, we do this with Sjoerd. He was also our first speaker, Sjoerd Kluiving. He is the VU Distinguished Fellow of the Anthropocene. So that's a new position. We invited Sjoerd to fulfill this one, to give more visibility, but also to fill the Anthropocene discussion at the VU and also beyond. So we are very happy to be able to discuss this or to organize this together with you. And with that, I'm also going to introduce you because you will open the event today. So Sjoerd, he started in the hard sciences as in geoarchaeology and really the physical geography of really in the scientific background. So later on, he moved more into the humanities directions. That's quite remarkable, actually. And it also means that today, Sjoerd works, all in science, but also in the social sciences and humanities, so covering all sorts of areas. So he's a very good candidate for this position because, as you will probably also later explore, in the Anthropocene, all sorts of disciplines need to work together. There's so many issues and discussions to be had. So it's very nice to have this Sjoerd, someone who has a very good understanding of a broad range of topics. So yeah, as I said, Sjoerd started out in the more like natural sciences area, but then moved slowly towards the humanities, and some projects that he's working on now, to give you an example what that actually means, are related to energy regimes now, but also in the past, and also landscape management. So with that, I want to give the floor to you, and let's start.
Thank you, Nele. Thank you very much. I feel very honored, of course, to be your Distinguished Fellow of the Anthropocene. I've been indeed working for a long time already on this subject. I remember that I first saw a researcher called Jet Kaplan. He's an American who recently moved from Hong Kong to Calgary, I learned this weekend, who actually was on EGU conference, and he actually explained what the Anthropocene was. So he showed it in an image, and that was one of the first encounters, maybe after a long time, maybe more than 10 years ago. So today I'm gonna talk a little bit about towards the theory of the Anthropocene, and that's also to give you a sort of an overview of what the Anthropocene is. Also, if we were to build a theory of the Anthropocene, what should we do, or what is available? I'm not saying that we have a theory of the Anthropocene, because it might be an overall question we keep on asking, but I think it's good to ask that question, especially when you start with a fellowship, to ask, is there some background material we can discover on the Anthropocene? Okay, so next 20 minutes will be me, and got something. I guess it's not working now, or yeah, no. Okay, yeah. So yeah, first I had a small talk with Kim before we started this lecture, and he said to me that he committed a sin this summer when he actually had to take an EasyJet to fly within Europe because of train problems there were. And of course, we know all train problems cannot be as fast as airplanes are, but of course they're much more sustainable in that sense. So there's a problem indeed. I like this Dutch editorial cartoonist I learned this summer. He's from Groningen, and he makes nice cartoons on putting you basically on a different track to see what's sustainable, what's unsustainable. Another one, this is more also pretty right in the sense that it talks about Western lifestyle and also how ignorance plays a role in sort of just saying that nothing is wrong, or that's just business as usual sort of scenario. We'll talk about it also later in our lectures. So this is to start off. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about what the Anthropocene is, how people have defined it. We'll talk about the problem, some of the overarching disciplines. We'll work towards the theory of the Anthropocene. We'll look from the science. We'll look from examples, projects from the humanities, the social science, and also we'll have a small, really small discussion on the theory of the Anthropocene. And then also I will propose you a minor proposal on the Anthropocene, and maybe I'll end a little bit about the program of Distinguished Fellowship this fall. So first go to Elizabeth Colbert. She's an American geologist. She wrote several books also on the 6th mass extinction, but this is a more recent book on Under a White Sky, referring to the geoengineering techniques which may become available in the later decades. And she basically, she defines basically the Anthropocene by saying that we humans cover more than half of the ice-free land. We usually are managing all the rivers in the world. We fix more nitrogen in our fertilizer plants and legume crops than all terrestrial ecosystems combined. We also have, of course, a transportation sector and power stations, which have 100 times more CO2 than natural volcanoes do. We also cause earthquakes, and maybe more strikingly, we people outweigh wild animals by more than 8 to 1. And if we add to that the weight of our domesticated animals, it becomes 22 to 1. So the imbalance is enormously. With these numbers, you can conclude that Homo sapiens has become the major driver of extinction and also speciation, because our domesticated animals are much more, of course, than the wild animals are. So welcome to the Anthropocene. What is the Anthropocene? We'll keep on these asked questions. It's also ask it for society as a group and also individually. You can ask these questions to that. We have different group response with individual response. It's definitely politics. When I look at a news item on the TV or on the newspaper, I see multiple items relating to the Anthropocene. Of course, if you want to see it, if you can read it, but it's very much there. It's also very much legal. It's a legal matter, and I must say I'm happy that it is, but of course can be much faster. But there's also legal experts here at the VU who testify that the cases of different organizations against corporations and countries are increasing now at the moment, but it needs to speed up, of course. Above all, of course, the Anthropocene is also the economy. The economy, we'll go back to it. The economy is also a driving mechanism of our current system, and it will be continue to do so. So we better change the economy, or we say something from the economy we think it should be. Okay, the Anthropocene is for many disciplines. It also considers many planetary systems. It is very introduced into academia, as Philipp has introduced to us. We have a debate in academia on the Anthropocene, but also it is among journalists and books write about the Anthropocene. There are magazines about there's even a glossy about the Anthropocene. There's even I have a digital subscription to a magazine of the Anthropocene. You also can feel a little bit uneasy about it. So when people enter this room, not everybody looks very happy, and that might be because of the age of the day. It is maybe too late, but the Anthropocene is not a subject which always makes you cheerful. Sometimes you can feel gloomy about it, or you can have a different sort of feeling about it, which is not easy to explain. So that makes it also also the vast interdisciplinarity can also be overwhelming in some day. And as you can see that most, didn't even include Philipp's book in here, so sorry Philipp, but I guess next time we can do so as well. But these are some examples of different people talking about the Anthropocene, from scientists to different disciplines. And I will not talk about most of them here in my talk, but some of them, like the one by Julia Thomas et al. John Zalasiewicz, will have a quote also later on in the talk. But it is an enormous amount of material from on the Anthropocene already there. And I'm not talking about, we'll count publications. That's even we do it. Did you ever do a count on that one, Kim? No, you didn't. So it could be an interesting exercise in itself. Just Google in Anthropocene and see how many hits you will get. Okay, so the problem we have is the continued economic growth. Bill Rees, he was a member of the Canadian Club of Rome, who celebrated their 50th anniversary a couple of years ago. And he said that we're continue to live in a world of ecological overshoot, which is confirmed by the IPCC. We say we have a problem of climate change, far worse than expected. And yeah, you don't only have to look at the weather reports from the last month to see that the future is sometimes becoming unpredictable. And also their communication also speeds up. So the IPCC also said every emitted ton of carbon emissions contributes linear to global warming. And added to that is the IPBES, the International Platform on Biodiversity Strategies. And they claim that we enter the decade of restoration because the biodiversity is a very much behind. I have a colleague here at the university who says nature is 5-0 behind. He says so bad is the nature at the moment. So we need this decade of restoration, countdown to 2030. That's less than 7 years from now. So we better speed up. In a special issue I wrote together published last year with Philipp, we defined 3 broad and deep transitions that are needed to address this huge problem. That's first an energy system to transition to a renewable and primary electricity-based system. That's of course the mechanical system, but also of course maybe the decrease of consumption on energy as part of that first deep transition. It's the current use of space, both on land and in the ocean. So reduce the always increasing expansionist view of always ever more space, ever more land, ever more profit. What's also associated with that. And the third deep transition is the food transition. And there's a 3 times with it because the food has an enormous impact. It has an impact on climate, has an impact on biodiversity, and it also has an impact on your own health. So if we were to go to a plant-based diet and subsequent localized food system, we could probably also be published in Nature. We could probably have emitted half of our climate problem. So if the global population would adopt such a plant-based diet. Okay. So some paper I published with Catherine Snow. We looked at some of the history. We compared histories of the Netherlands and Lebanon. And besides that, we found that the Netherlands basically had a precursor, you could say, from the fossil fuel energy regime by the peat exploitation. And also showing that in each energy regime transition, there are multiple periods divided over time periods. And also looking at differences, inequalities we see from case studies compared to Lebanon, which has quite a different history than the Netherlands. And we looked at landscapes of accumulation and also compared these 2 different forms of accumulation, these 2 different settings. And that's where the paper is about. Actually, the same special issue we talked earlier about. Okay, so overarching disciplines. So how can disciplines be helpful in helping us in changing the system or dealing with big societal problems, what we talked about, biodiversity loss, climate change, pandemics, inequality, social unrest. So these challenges can be examined from perspectives of science. I'm going to read them all out to you, humanities and social science. And we're certainly not going to talk all of these today, but we're going to pick certain examples from it, from all 3 domains, to see how they look at the Anthropocene and what they are giving us. So here's Earl again. He will return in many different talks. I think Kim will also talk about Earl. He wrote a very short introduction, this book, what's lying up here. And he basically says that from paleoecology and archaeology, we can actually there's a change, of course. I'll show you later. And even in regions where there's no influence, they can look with all this evidence they have in research that humans have lived there in the past. So there's always actually an imprint on the areas. We'll see in a moment. Also, there's little areas where no people have been worked. So there, he talks about better and worse Anthropocenes. So if you have in this age of humans, if you were living on a low-lying island, you're living in a worse Anthropocene. And also, if you're the last species to get extinct, you also have a not so good Anthropocene. And he says that the Anthropocene tells us together that we humans are a force of nature, and that we actually have a decision to make. Actually, Earl's a quite positive guy. He says he says the story of the Anthropocene has just begun. And there's still time to shape a future in which both humans and non-humans can thrive. He even claims it for millennia. So still a chance for each of us to write a better future in the permanent rock records of Earth history. That was, I think, before we stepped out of the working group, but that's still definitely. Okay, so this is some of you can see the anthropogenic succession of Earl. Usually he ranges from wildlands where there is hardly any impact to semi-natural anthropes to used anthropes. And most of our current, where we live, in a sort of urban environment, we are in a used habitat. And with intensive land use, also with high population density. And these are the way how he looks at anthropogenic succession, also studies the landscape. So this is a paper I published this year with Roland Waterman. He is working in on the subject of aquapuncture. And we were actually publishing on the proposed UNESCO geopark in the southwestern Netherlands and over here. And we formulate that a deeper insight is achieved into the geological history including the natural history of the area. In the proposed plan, the application for UNESCO, you also see that the application form is also using the sustainability theme also in its application. And so we'll hear probably this fall also whether they get the status of geopark. Okay, so the idea is to introduce water. Well, these are the players in the waterfront, from shipping to nautical events to also biodiversity, of course, in the waters. And we applied to this form the Nature Futures framework, which is is shown here. You have a nature for nature, a nature as culture, and nature for society. And the Anthropocene landscape and waterscape of the Schelde Delta will inspire and motivate these inhabitants and visitors with their history and also with some responsibility. So in an ideal stakeholder process, you can see over here in stakeholder engagement, you actually talk about these different nature visions, and you will discuss also how this nature future framework can be applied to the area and which type of nature you are going for. Okay, so there's sustainable vision for the area. We also wrote it in this paper to use leisure and economy defined prone to be followed up by aquaculture and nature futures as a response from bottom-up stakeholder interaction to be supported by, implemented by policy makers. There's a transition in practice. This is an interesting thing that this applying this aquapuncture nature futures framework development is taking into account the special cultural natural history of the region, and it also asks for stakeholder interaction incremental steps. So what you have to see here that the old first horizon is the current paradigms going down over time, that we have the new emerging paradigm ideas, innovations coming up, and this green curve are the incremental adjustments. So we need more incremental adjustments to move to a more sustainable future. Okay, so when we move over to one of the PhDs I had in my Terra Nova project, they looked at this nature future scenario, and they also looked at, they saw that concluded the business usual futures were usually, associated with negative impacts on all of these three components of rewilding of nature. And they also highlighted some major gaps in the scenarios that basically, boils down to the paucity of spatially explicit approaches and also difficulty in getting the results in participatory scenario planning. And secondly, found also that scenarios explored co-benefits between multiple nature were overall missing from the literature. So more of these approaches are needed in the future to also among different nature values, and also more integration also of stakeholder participation and participatory approaches. Okay, so back to Earl Ellis also in a former picture that he says that ecology is usually seen as disturbed by humanity, and the narrative for the Anthropocene will be ecologies embedded within human systems. That's the real narrative for the moment. So which means that ancestral value biosphere were created, and also mosaic, global and permanent, as human stewardship can sustain the biosphere, include the global context, and work across anthro-mosaics with use, novel, wild. So engaging landscapes toward a better Anthropocene, observing, negotiating, stakeholders, engaging stewardship, engineering, and scaling from local to global. Okay, that concludes his talk. Then the humanities. That's Bruno Latour. Bruno Latour had a saying that we, in his book, last book he wrote about we are earthbound, we are terrestrials amid terrestrials, and that said, he does not lead to the same politics as saying we're humans in nature. And that also he goes against the choice basically for or against anthropocentrism. So not implying that there is a center, but rather he sees a, under the new climatic regime, to stop speaking about humans and to refer to terrestrials, the earthbound, insisting on humans, and also the compost included in the etholomy of the word human. And that's indeed very much conform the humus, as discussed by Donna Haraway in her Staying with the Trouble, where she also looks at humus and also referring to the Anthropocene, which was quoted by Philipp in the start. Okay, so to shift from one system to the other, we shall learn to move away from sort of economization that's projected on the earth. And he foresees a movement into the terrestrial, so away from the local to global tractor, maybe the local to global, what Earl was suggesting previously. And he said, let's call it a conflict, dramatizing it between humans who believe that they're alone in the Holocene and the terrestrials who know that they are in the Anthropocene and seek to cohabit with other terrestrials in the authority of a power that lacks any political institution. Okay, so one more slide. Other humanities scholars, Warwick Mackenzie, talked about building forms of collaborative, scientific, technical, intellectual, organizational, effective manual label to confront the Anthropocene and find a path through unstable time and analysis. And also referring in another paper by McManus, also on different scales and modes of visualizing the planetary history of human activity, and referring to the Anthropocene project, which was in about 5 years ago. That was probably also with the installment of the Anthropocene Working Group, I believe. And the Anthropocene project asks us to consider what images do the current debate bring us understand as those circulating about this brand new epoch we have brought about. Okay, more about that later. So to conclude the theory search, The Social Sciences, which is a book by Mark Carney. And I must say, it was a very interesting guide to read because Mark Carney is a former bank director of Canada and of the United Kingdom. And so he's quite some authority. And you can see also that our European finance head, Christine Lagarde, is also supporting this book. So that gives hope for the future, I would say, but we'll see about that. So an objectives theory is that basically value was tied to the node of production and also about the time it used and the labor employed. And in contrast, he says subjective theories of value push greater weight on how exchange value reveals the underlying value. In subjective theories, value is in the eye of the beholder and driven by preferences and to a lesser extent scarcity. So the neoliberal economy is based on subjective value determined what the consumer wants to pay for it. Value is an illusion and making the price the value. The price of everything is becoming the value of everything. So that's the neoliberal economy. And to meet the 1.5 degree target, I have to admit I'm not an economist. So economists here in the room, they can always attack me and say maybe you're wrong, but that's for the debate. But to meet the 1.5 target, more than 80% of the current fossil fuel reserves needs to be stranded and need to stay in the ground. And that's what's at stake, and that's what the discussion is about. So also an estimated 230 billion of euros is stranded, risk of being stranded by two potential disruptions, the electric vehicles, the driverless vehicles, and the car sharing services. And we can also state that GDP as a measure of value fails to capture intangible factors as relative equality, robust social capital, well-being, and that characterize happy, healthy, and prosperous societies. Okay, so widespread loss of coral reefs are also, although they're only 0.1% of the ocean floor, they host more than 1/4 of all marine fish. And they also support over 500 million people and who rely on them mostly in poor countries. So the estimates of economic impact are significant if we don't do anything on the climate change, with almost suggesting a decade of lost global growth, which is unprecedented in the modern era. And these calculations are highly likely to be underestimated because the exclusion of climate feedback loops, and even no account is taken of non-market values, such as the value of species lost in 6 mass extinction. Okay, so I guess, you also said, to paraphrase, our boomers okay with leaving an insoluble mess. And also that the sustainable transition is not in 2050, but it's happening now. And the book ends indeed with a just equilibrium is needed between a steady state economic system and degrowth for the foreseeable future. Okay, so we'll come to Thomas Williams and Zalaziewicz. They wrote a nice book about drivers. I'm going to the end. Thank you, Neil. A multidisciplinary approach. So no straight GDP measures, but GDP per capita for a more fair and just comparison. And no environmental economics, but ecological economics, which relies on degrowth, and a just equilibrium between the steady state economy. Okay, so many different disciplinary scholars in all 3 domains are increasingly studying the Anthropocene. An overarching Anthropocene theory, especially over the 3 domains, is non-existent, although we see many researchers also crossing boundaries between domains, also usually within domains. Towards an Anthropocene theory is definitely an interesting exercise to be continued or to discuss. And there's also, I think, a call for transformation in all fields to make incremental steps, which needs to be acknowledged by all academic, governmental, local, societal actors. I think I'll leave it with here. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, we have some time for questions, for quick questions, and we'll have a discussion afterwards. So only if you need some clarification somewhere. Of course, I think that's one.
Yeah, thanks, Sjoerd. I just take the opportunity also again to welcome you as our fellow. And this is an impressive overview of everything that exists, and it's sort of a lot of contradictions, I would also say. So good luck with figuring out how it fits together. But my question is a bit more a practical one. I think being a social scientist, let's say myself, I love theory. And theory can be something you do just because it's nice and it gives you a lot of pleasure. But what are the practical implications of getting those disciplines talking to each other, maybe realizing they don't want to or they don't understand? And how would you see your role in sort of translating all of this quite sort of top-heavy and really inspiring, but still quite dense stuff to some real concrete actions? Or is that maybe too much for the couple of months that you have with us? So, thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't show all my slides, of course, because there was no time for it. But one of the slides maybe I can show, which is right here. Yeah. That's maybe the example of the proposed minor program. So I think Philipp was hinting at how can you make education in that way that you really are contributing to something holistically as is there. So this is a proposed minor program, which is not functioning yet, but we're debating with many faculties at the moment and also with authorities to get this in place. If we get a green light, then it will be on next September 24. But don't shoot me for it. We'll just try to get there. But this is a way of trying to mix these, consisting of teachers from different faculties on the board. So this could be a first step, I would say, to bring a sort of intra-university program. And I think we need more of that.
I agree.
Okay, anything else? No? Yes, then thank you, Sjoerd. And time to welcome our next speaker. So that's Kim Cohen. He's from the University of Utrecht. Didn't have to travel that far, but a little bit. And yeah, just a bit like, yeah, maybe different than Sjoerd, but you also moved between disciplines. So you also have this sort of development in your background. And yeah, you are now working in the Department of Physical Geography at the University Utrecht or Utrecht University on landscape age, sea level rise and flooding history of the Netherlands, and then in different areas like the Rhine, the North Sea, and also different time scales or eras, the Pleistocene, Holocene, and Anthropocene. So you've also worked together with many different disciplines. So there, I think you have quite some similarities there. And yeah, you mentioned a couple of questions that you tried to answer. And I guess, yeah, some interesting ones I think are the largest floods of the Rhine in the last 1,000 years. So that's, I think, impressive. And also, at what rate does the Netherlands sink? So I don't know if you're going to tell more about that, but I think that's interesting also. Okay, so yeah, I mean, maybe why we or Sjoerd invited you is because you were a voting member of the you're a voting member of the Subcommission on Quaternary Stratigraphy and an officer in the International Commission on Stratigraphy, where you administer the geological timescale. So I think you have to explain a bit more what that means. But yeah, so you're an expert when it comes to the Anthropocene and the discussion, something that Philipp also mentioned earlier, the golden spike, all this debate that there is. Yeah, when did it actually start, the Anthropocene? We heard there's a big political dimension to that as well. But we are very much looking forward to hear from you how all the discussion went.
Thanks for having me. It's very nice to be the third person speaking. As a bit of a spoiler, I will show Earl Ellis, but not read out his quotes, but just let him speak for himself over YouTube at some point in this lecture, which is titled Coverage and Status, with capitalized status even. Because Anthropocene, amongst geologists, is an unofficial unit of the geological time scale. It is a word that rhymes to Holocene and Pleistocene. You know what scene means. It's also in Cenozoic, Cenozoic. With zoic, you know, it's life, especially animal life, but all life. It's Greek, ancient Greek. Keno means something like current or new or present, something like that. Holocene means fully present, totally present. Pleistocene means almost fully present. We can go back, Miocene, half present, Eocene, the dawn of present, something like that. Paleocene, old, but still quite present. And then before that, we have totally different life, like dinosaurs. Then we are in the Mesozoic and not in the present Zoic anymore, right? That kind of history or the humanity side almost of terms in geology. Antique terms almost. Of course, reinvented in the 19th and 18th century. But I also want to talk about inclusivity, because I thought of many of you are humanities and social science, so I should use inclusivity and not data. But use inclusivity of data, because you should not only be culturally inclusive, but also data inclusive. If you study the present, which is basically the synonym for Anthropocene, Anthropocene is the current era proposed, you should use all data that we have. And when I say data, because I have a background in natural sciences, yeah, I think numbers and so on, things you can measure. It's a satellite or something you can decipher maybe from taking a sample and putting it in a lab and then adding some analysis and calibration and whatever you do. And then you say something about the past, how old something is, how hot it was, etc. How many animals there were or plants from what species composition and how different that is to something you compare to usually something closer by the present, or maybe no longer the present, because it's maybe better to compare maybe with beginning of 20th century as a kind of a last natural state, but still studied by scholars that use more or less the same kind of attitudes to observations as we do, not too much difficult back in time historical conversions to make, but we can read the knowledge ourselves and don't need an intermediate scholar to translate, I don't know, some hieroglyphs or whatever to know what was observed. So there is something with using the present as a key to the past. That kind of usage is there in geology. But it's more or less an extra thing in geology because you use it to calibrate your true traditional geological methods, and then you shop with all the other kind of sciences to know how it works. Inclusivity. Yeah, and then there are transdisciplinary issues, and there is something called chronically. That means I don't want a time transgressive unit. I don't want something that starts in Amsterdam at a different time than in Utrecht. When I say this is this period, it's synchronous all around the world, please. That's isochronic. But not all terms are like that. Like Sjoerd was an adult earlier than I. Right? So it's also a time stage, but not isochronic, that term. Maturity. But Anthropocene, well, should it be or should it not? That's one of this discussion. So let's speed up this talk. Outline, what is the Anthropocene to whom? Well, this has been introduced in 2000. It was a conference, it was in Mexico. It was not just an idea from the back of the room, it was annoyance. Stop comparing atmospheric composition of the 1990s and say that that could be natural ozone composition and so on. It's we know perfectly well from chemistry, from experiments, etc., that it's a totally alien or human created substances in the atmosphere that do totally different things than it ever did before in Holocene. In natural times, we are no longer in the Holocene, in the atmosphere. It's a different world. It's a different sphere. It's an Anthropocene world, right? That's the kind of thing. Then a whole lot of talks. The concept was also long brought up in ecology. So all kinds of things like domestication of animals mentioned, even in quantitative numbers. Extinctions of all kinds of species at a more and more rapid rate in more and more recent times. That aspect of it. And also the spread of species, unwanted also, like all these exotic mollusks that are now in our precious European harbors, but we have all these Japanese mollusks and so on. We don't want that, or we have to accept it, or it's the new world. Enter Earth system sciences. There will be a slide on that. 2006, 2008 in geology, also started Geological Society of London at a posh meeting. And after that, well, let's also start a working group on it for several reasons. And that working group was launched about 2009 and now has extended, and they are almost ready to submit their proposal to a voting body that I'm a member of the International Commission of Stratigraphy. It's a big commission. It has the president of the Carboniferous, the president of the Ordovicium, the president of all these geological time periods, the president of the Quaternary sits also there. also a couple of presidents of terminology and of chronology. And they approve or disapprove also by voting proposals that have been put forward to them and have been voted before in the subcommissions, such as subcommission on quaternary, which is the youngest bit of geological time. It comprises Pleistocene, Holocene, and Anthropocene, so that's where I'm in. Also, I'm not a voting member of the higher international commission, but I'm an officer in there. So when there is a decision made on something, maybe the status of a boundary is from officious to official, and then the chart gets an update, and then I'm the person doing that graphically and putting it on the web together with a colleague and so on. So I'm a bit of an insider in the procedures of that, but I'm also a Holocene geologist and a Pleistocene geologist, so I know my stuff. I know my stuff about human impact. I work in the Netherlands. It's a pretty human impacted country. I know how these timelines work. And I think I also can upscale it a little bit to the global scale. And academic journals, they are around since 2013 with the name Anthropocene in it. So I would also at this point say Anthropocene exists as a term, as a transdisciplinary term, or a term used in many disciplines, maybe that's the better word, synonym to present, also a bit of an outlook to future, our state of transition, much associated to transformations and sustainability and climate change and global change and so on. More and more and more. I think we should go quickly to the video of Earl Ellis and let him explain what it is.
The most important thing to know about the Anthropocene is that it puts people in a new position in relation to the rest of nature. Basically, humans have emerged as a force of nature on this planet. We are changing Earth's climate faster than at any time in the last 100,000 years as a result of increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at rates faster than any time since the dinosaurs. So the Anthropocene first got its name at a conference in 2001 when a Nobel Prize winning atmospheric chemist, Paul Crutzen, was frustrated at his colleagues who were calling our time period the Holocene, the period of geologic time since the last ice age. From his point of view, everything had changed since the Industrial Revolution. The atmosphere had changed, so many things had changed, that we should recognize a new time period changed by humans, the Anthropocene. We're changing the Earth in so many ways. What's controversial, though, is when did this begin? That's one of the controversies. When did humans really become a global shaper of the Earth? So the group that is responsible for recognizing the Anthropocene within the geologic timescale, the official geologic history of the Earth, the geologic timescale, they are proposing to recognize the beginning of the Anthropocene around 1950 in recognition of a time period of very rapid accelerations and human-induced changes in the environment that has been known as the Great Acceleration. The middle of the 20th century is not the only proposed beginning for the Anthropocene. Two other major proposals are that the Anthropocene began very early, with farmers first clearing the forests across the Earth for agriculture, which happened at least 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. That released carbon dioxide and potentially changed climate. We also have the production of rice, which in those wet paddies produces lots of methane. That methane release also changed Earth's climate 5,000 years ago. And you even have the proposal for beginning the Anthropocene in the year about 500 years ago with the Old World, New World collision, where you have the Old World meeting the New World, bringing its diseases and other types of devastating effects on the populations of the Americas, which caused a huge regrowth of forest and brought down carbon dioxide. One of the biggest questions about the Anthropocene is whether it should be considered to be a bad thing. And the reason that it's a big question is because so many of the definitions of what humans are doing to this planet are negative things, like changing the climate and causing mass extinction. Yet on the other hand, the Anthropocene is not over, and it really remains to be seen what we're going to make of this human time period. The Anthropocene is really a new story about what humans are doing to the environment, what it even means to be human. And as a result, you see every kind of idea, from humans being the destroyers of this planet to humans being the salvation of this planet. Right now, about 90% of the Earth's mammal biomass is humans and livestock. So we have become the most dominant mammal on Earth. We've also been putting so much plastic into the environment that if you take all the plastic that we've produced so far on Earth, we could wrap the entire planet in a thin layer of plastic film. We humans are going to shape the future of this planet. So what kind of planet are we going to shape? Are we going to shape it for the better, or are we going to continue to do what we've been doing so far and unintentionally creating a worse future for this planet, both for humans and for the rest of life on Earth?
So if I map out what are the different opinions on what the Anthropocene is, or what the concept should comprise, that's the kind of things that I want to do in the remainder of this talk. So first, it is a time period, yes, but is it a time period with a sharp onset, or is it more a kind of a floating or gradually emerging kind of time period? Is it something that happened? Should it be something that happened instantaneously everywhere, or going or passing some kind of boundary? Or should it be more a fluid or gradual thing? Yeah, well, in the Americas it started in the 500s, but in Asia already 5,000. No, it should only start at 5,000 because methane is more important than crossing the Atlantic and colliding civilizations of two continents, or how do you call it? Hemispheres, whatever. The Anthropocene Working Group, they want a sharp definition. Opponents want, or they say, well, they don't want that. They want it more gradual, or even conceptual, like this maturity kind of concept. Maybe we can get in another Anthropocene and another one. Who knows? Let's switch from temporal line to say, is it a global thing, or is it a continental thing, or is it even smaller? The Netherlands entered the Anthropocene in the 1600s. England a little bit later with their Industrial Revolution, because our polders are older than their steam engines or so. And the Americas quickly after, but not earlier, etc., etc. China after World War II or something. With communism helped them start up their Anthropocene. I'm not choosing my words very carefully here to teach you a little bit here. So I'm not politically correct in saying this, but allow me, please. So the Anthropocene working group says that the Anthropocene is from when it reached really global cover, when it was everywhere. That is when the Anthropocene entered, not when something started a little bit. It should really pass the first 3 tipping points, and then the 4th tipping point, that the last one, that's the real enter. Not invention of agriculture, not invention of the steam machine, but global expansion of industrialized countries and a bit of nuclear and so on. And then the word Anthropocene, it has this human in it, and then is that correct? Why should it be? Should it not be, I don't know, the mass or something? Should it not be the consequence, right, of the cause? So these are the lowest 2 of these things. Anthropocene working group said, now it's not fully correct probably to say it's Anthropocene, because it doesn't fit in this Pleistocene, Holocene kind of Greek language thing. That's a bit weird. After fully current, you cannot have even more fully current or something. So it's a bit of a change of how you create these names. So for that, it's not so good. But anyway, it's an accepted term. It's so much in use. Why bother? We don't need to be perfect with our terms anyway. It's useful. Or it's even trivial how you call it. You can call it obscene, you can call it capitalocene or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's not a word. But I think, well, you see where the Anthropocene working group is, and there is opposed people. And then also you can say, why is it called Anthropocene? Because there are so many humans, because of, I don't know, better healthcare or better food or change of culture, I don't know. There are now more humans than there were in 1950. So it's a fact that there are so many humans. But you can also say, because there are so many humans, there is so many environmental impact, and that is why it's a global change thing. So is the humans, are they the cause, the effect, are they both? Is it important? Whatever. So that's something you can think of. But anyway, it's just a name of the period that doesn't affect so much the timing and the scale, I would say. And then, yeah, in Sjoerd's presentation, he gave a lot of quotes. But I ask you, what is the data? What is the source of the data on these quotes? There we now create more earthquakes than nature does. Or we now move more sediment than on land than river systems do. Or these numbers on livestock. Or these numbers on the stocks of fossils. What data is that? Or the numbers on the numbers of population. So that's what I want to go to. Well, I should say, and that's just quick, Anthropocene, so it's not just measuring climate and how much that changed. It's more the land use, more the population, more the energy, more pollutants and ecological changes. Stefan, I promise you that I should show something. So this is one of the people that is from Earth System Sciences. This was a time, early 2000s, the concept of planetary boundaries was explored and it needed to be quantified. So that the first time all these different disciplines came together, each of them giving their numbers as best as they could, based on their data, as best as they could. And they saw that, yeah, this is all time plots from 1750 to 2000 everywhere. In the last couple of parts of it, you see a big rise, enormous acceleration of population, also living much more urban. In green, there is a lot of loss of tropical rainforest. It goes up, the loss goes up, yes. Amount of domesticated land goes up. What do we have in black? Carbon dioxide and ozone. But none of these are geological things. Everything of this is measured, taking samples or counted or surveyed, census or just reported by the companies themselves or the different governments themselves, and then collated by UN bodies accidentally since the 1950s. So this is my graph of the coverage of this data. So when I ask, where does this data come from? Well, if you get data from the last century, it's seldom geological data. It's much more from the social sciences, and I learned from Sjoerd that I should not bag social sciences under humanities, but keep them separate or something. But sorry for that. You learn something every day. But same for natural sciences. So ecological data, simply counting what species are still living, and then seeing that it drops over time. If you repeat your counts in your plots, in your nature reserves, in the vicinity of nitrogen polluted areas, as we have here. That's the kind of source of the data. And then if you define something that is very, very, very late, then actually you don't have any geological data to base it on. But this commission, this working group was launched under this geological commission with its subcommissions, and they have to obey all kinds of rules that are how to define a geological period. You collect geological data, and then you do it, and then you discuss it internationally until China agrees with Russia and the US and some European countries, and one maybe of the global south represented if this person is found, and then you accept it. But you cannot do it for this very young time period because there is no geological data. So that's a good excuse for the geologists to not want to vote about it, or that's a good excuse for the working group to postpone and acquire funding. Maybe from humanities, because those are the people that are very interested in the present. And they fund actually, and they also like to fund scientists because they like to observe scientists because it's a different, very transdisciplinary for them. Or they are really worried, or they think it's really interesting. So something like that happened. Haus der Cultuur and their Welt sponsored a bit of the Anthropocene Working Group. Anthropocene Working Group was very happy. And for 5 years, they worked up 12 different sites along the world. One of them, the lake in Canada, one ice core from Antarctica, a peat bog from Poland, a Baltic Sea core, etc. And they studied, and finally they could do their homework, basically. Actually, we are repeating all kinds of things that environmental sciences had also done in different locations. But now they could do it properly on the same core, all the different techniques, all parallel, so that they really could make a convincing case that really you can see it geologically. Or I should say with geological methods on super recent sediments. Still, is not a lot of geological data. It's just a drop in the ocean, basically, or in a drop in an empty ocean. But there is now a little bit of geological method processed underpinning by a working group, really with the purpose of looking at it. So, but still a lot more of the rationale for calling out the Anthropocene is not from geological. It doesn't change that at all. Right? It's the Anthropocene is just as strong as before, but now also for geological procedures, there is a good body of geologically acceptable science or geological methods run through science that can do it. So that's where we are now. So in 14 July or so, or was it 13 July or 12 July, there was a press conference that from those 12 sites, there's now one site put forward as the most principal site. And after deliberation in the Anthropocene Working Group, it was a lake in Canada. You can look that up. There will be some auxiliary sites also produced, and that now will be in the proposal that Anthropocene Working Group will submit. They say, in my words, Anthropocene to them is a global scale, irreversible, unprecedented rate and magnitude human impact, defining period, basically. And that began around in the mid-20th century, say in 1950, maybe in 1952, really, but they are considering then to say, well, we define it in 1950 because we want actually a more round number than the actual year. It's a bit overkill, but mid-20th century, 1950 round number, that would be good. And that is also what is this great acceleration that the planetary boundaries groups also saw. And then there were other people that some of them ex-Anthropocene working group that say, well, if we give this message about the Anthropocene, are we doing it right? It's so geological. We think that's a bit of a rabbit hole, or too narrow view on Anthropocene to define it geologically. That should be a reason to not want to propose it this way. Why did you go so far? Why didn't and also they say this is not transdisciplinary then anymore, and so this is a danger. So we should not do it that way. So that's now part of the debate. There are also other things in it that will be on the next slide. And the ICS, the International Commission, so this people have not said anything about it. People who mostly work in a much more distant past and never have to do with anything in the present, well, in their daily lives, yes, but in their professional lives, no. But concerned, of course, about it because everybody is. But yeah, So they have to still think of their position, and they're getting a bit impatient because they wait for 15 years now for the proposal to be finished to vote about it. But they say it's an official geological term, because if we call out the Anthropocene as something that started at a fixed position at some point, it should not harm the Holocene too much, right? If you started at 5,000 years ago, then you halve the Holocene. You get opponents maybe. If you started super late, yeah, then okay, you can do with it. 1950, accidentally also for radiocarbon dating people is a very easy one, because they separate how to treat radiocarbon dates from after 1950 from the ones before, because nuclear bomb testing influenced all that dynamics. But anyway, it's an officious or unofficial term until we are done voting, because it's not some other. If you rhyme on Holocene and Pleistocene, you're not allowed to say that that's official. We geologists, experts of the past, we rule how we call the present in our terms, or so, right? That's what you can think. So stereotypical responses among geologists, always fun. The Anthropocene is not rock yet. It's all mud, or even less than mud, watery, murky water. And at the bottom of our ocean, it's not settled yet. It's not geology. Why bother? It's not our problem, or not our term. I think that's a quite a bit of isolationist position. Also, those same geologists always say in their research proposals that they want to investigate the climate of the past to help our changing times, etc. And then if you have that position and this one at the same time, it's a bit weird. Other thing is, it's too early to call it. We should wait 1 million years or 1,000 years before we should define these terms. I think that's also a bit, I don't know, ducking the ball or something, dodging the ball. Because we are not defining terms for the Earth, we are defining terms for practicing professionals, geologists that maybe need it, and non-geologists that also maybe need it, because it's already in use, so it's also weird. And the other thing is that many geologists think, yeah, it's just a spike, just a bleep in time, our human impact and our little accident of overshooting and changing time. But at the same time, we know that things like evolution and so on, it never returns. It's always the next step. And what we know also from the thermodynamics of introducing a lot of carbon dioxide and warming up the oceans, it will not cool down back. We can stop the warming up and level it out, maybe, but we cannot cool it down. Yeah, unless something crazy happens with, I don't know, meteoric strike or something, or mega engineering, but that's also not what we are planning terms for. The other thing is, it's a geological term, but it's only started about 80 years ago, or 70 or whatever, 75. That's weird. Yeah, it is maybe unusual, but on the end, it's the very youngest bit, so it's not the present is an even weirder term. There's no length, but it's infinitely short. And then this thing, the ones in yellow, I think, are the more important ones. They think it's not geological. It's only one. Yeah, okay. Now they have 12 sites that are geology, and only the sites are collected for geologists who want to define it, not for through scientific reasons, only for meta-scientific reasons that we need sites to define it and to let it accept. So it's just administration or politics or talking, but not science. It's not learning us anything new. It's just confirming what we already knew from other data, from other disciplines. But yeah, on the other hand, yes, but it's because you're studying something super recent. You're studying a time period during which science was relatively mature, right? There were over 1,000 scientists, I think over 10,000 scientists. I don't know these exact numbers for all the time since the 1950s studying these things. And there's an accumulated body of knowledge that is not solely geological, but it's all the disciplines. And maybe you can separate natural sciences data or social science or kind of economic, factual data from cultural or opinionated, opinion-affected data, but still, there is a lot of non-geological data that is probably more informative on 1950 than these 12 sites of the Anthropocene Working Group or some, many other also studies that accidentally have covered the time period, but yeah. And the last thing is that Anthropocene Working Group gets so much attention. Sometimes you get, why are they always so interested in the present? Why are they always so interested in the last 50 years and in the next 50 years? Why are they not that interested in my geological time period so far back? Or is it the Anthropocene Working Group that seeks attention so much? Why are they publishing papers and giving interviews? Why they are not submitting their proposal to our commission? Because we want to vote about it. Kind of part of it is impatience, part of it is looking, part of it is really not understanding, or part of it is being not understanding how big the Anthropocene is, how that it's maybe bigger in environmental sciences or bigger in politics now than it actually is in geology, because geology, it's not, there's no data for geology on that. They don't work there, they work in the past. Anthropocene is present. Yeah, so that's that basically. So yeah, and then some technicalities. The Anthropocene Working Group has to finish their proposal. They're nearly done. Just one analysis and one secondary side vote. The SQS then has to discuss it, and we can then adapt it a little bit or give a bit of feedback. But then we have to vote allowed 1 month. Maybe if we over email, and maybe if we are very lively in our discussion, they will grant us a second month. But then we have to, okay, now we have discussed enough, let's vote. Up. In Korea in 2024, in the summer, there is a next conference, and then we would like to have all the voting done, please. And maybe the voting it off done. Yeah, this is not. So then after SQS is voted, ICS has to also vote if they approve the advice of SQS. And then after that, Executive Committee of the IOGS then has to read through the procedures, and then for the final ratification. Then it's internationally accepted. And then also China will accept it, and the US, and all these different parts of the world at the same time. Because that's very important to have unity, at least on your terminology in science. That would be nice. And then what is it? And yeah, it's an annual layer and a small layer in Canada. How do they know? Because it's annually layered, so they count from the top, and they see all kinds of things changing. The plutonium is suddenly there, the right type of plutonium from these atmospheric tests that were there from 1952 onwards, but also other things like, and it's not only in Canada that you have that, it's everywhere. On all those 12 sites, they found that, but Canada the nicest. And that's a layer, but they also know for some reason that it's from 1952 or 2 layers lower is 1950, etc. How do they know that? Because they read in the newspaper or the archive newspapers that there were these big nuclear tests, or the NASA archives, or maybe it was not NASA, but the Ministry of Defense or something. So it's not geological data that they know the age. It's also not, maybe counting the layers, but they start in the present. Yeah, okay. This is that chart. That is my officer job. It has golden spikes, and this is interesting. So a technicality, but there are 2 ways of starting a geological period. And for most of geology, say traditional geology with fossils and so on, and ash beds and so on, they want a GSSP, the golden spike. It stands for Global Stratigraphic Section and Point. So they have long meetings and races between the different sites that each want to be the single GSSP site, Japan and Italy, neck on neck for the Middle Pleistocene. And then they decide in the end that it has to be, so that's why this voting is for, to settle this. And then the other one can be the secondary site. And then you have pinpointed this position that we don't know the age of, but that we know is a super sharp change in all kinds of things that happen all around the world, and we see it at a not at a condensed section, but at an expanded section that sediments nicely, so that you can really see that change. That's then the correlation point. That's where we define it. And you hopefully in the next 20 years, when dating techniques get a little bit better, then we can surround it with dates sharper and sharper and sharper, that we can narrow down the age. The point stays the same, but the numeric value we can slightly tune. So it's defined in rock, and the age is secondary. And the other option is, no, it's so far back in time, the beginning of the Earth. There is no rock of the beginning of the Earth. There are only meteorites that later landed on Earth, that are from that phase of the solar system. And they can be dated, and they give an age. It's a beautiful age. It's called 4, 5, 6, 7 million years. 4,567 million years, 4.5 billion years. 4, 5, 6, 7. I find that's beautiful. Adding up, I can remember it easily. But that's an age. It's a numeric age, and that's defined as the beginning of the Earth. That's called the GSSA. So you see at the bottom edge, where there is no more fossil-bearing rock, there was no life yet. There's no rock at all. It's all been remolten, and it was molten at the time. There, geologists allow themselves some escape. You could wonder the other edge of the geological time, where there is also all reasons of data to adopt the better approach, and humans counting how many sunsets or how many moonrises or how many full moons are more accurate than geological methods in dating 1950. So why this GSSP? So there are geologists that think this is overkill. It's a nice colloquial exercise. This is also this niche exercise that Ellis mentions in his resign letter. It's one of the aspects of it. So that's also maybe, there could be quite a bit of a debate in this commission, in the voting commissions, if this was the right choice. You see that actually in some of the responses. My own proposition, so now we get diplomatic because we are recorded and they have to vote. There's a lot of value, I think, in defining the Anthropocene in a kind of isochronic way. I recognize all these other positions, but if I weigh it, then I think Holocene starts at an isochronic moment, Pleistocene starts, then Anthropocene also. Otherwise, the Capitalocene can be floating, but the Anthropocene maybe not, or maybe not called just a capitalist period or something. That can be floating, but if you call it a scene, it should be isochronical. But we should really say it's an edge case. It's geologically defining the present, or geologically accepting that the present also exists. It's weird, but that data of the present, that non-geological data can be better than geological data. But you need to, if you accept that as geologists, then it can be very easy to bail out of this. But then maybe should not use a GSSP, but a GSSA to signal that better. But we should have also, so that's why I say we should have inclusive attitude. As geologists, we should not say that earth science is not geology or something. That's it's so narrowed down. It's not, or that, I don't know, measuring CO2 on Hawaii. That's not geology because it's atmosphere. Rock is rock. Water is not rock. Air is also not rock, not geology. Well, weird. And then the other thing is we need to do a bit of damage control, because sometimes it appears that if geologists accept it, they are the last ones of the sciences, or the strongest one of the sciences, or the most traditional one of the science. If we measure the present against the past or something, we need. Why is that? It's a bit of a weird frame, and it could be damaging. Also, if we vote it off, then it could also be damaging. These fossil geologists, they don't like to accept that times are changing or something. And maybe also the exact moment and the scientific, so it's scientifically accepted only when we have defined the base. We have connected that. But I think, well, most geologists that I speak, they know about global change. They also see that the human affected world is different than their world. But as soon as the onsets have to be defined, then, because the really only reason is we don't want the Holocene broken by some weird definition of the Anthropocene. We want the most pragmatic way. That's the talk, I think. I hope you will now have even more questions than earlier, and maybe you can influence my vote.
So before we go to the questions, also thanks a lot. I think this was a fantastic sort of, how you say, look into the kitchen. I'm not sure if you know what I mean. So what you actually do as geologists, and something is a bit weird to me, but really, really interesting. And I think it shows the significance of doing this work very thoroughly, because if you don't, then there's a lot of criticism. But I do actually have one question I think that many people might have, so I ask right away.
Okay.
What is your best guess of the vote? So, I mean, if you have a gut feeling, is it a yes or a no? Just be honest.
I think it's very close, actually, currently, but because I'm recorded, I will definitely not answer it. But and the difficulty is also that it's a double vote, or actually a triple vote, right? So it rounds, and it's also the proposal I've not yet seen, and there are strong points in it that I have seen from presentations at conferences, but not in the written form that I vote about it. And there were also things that, yeah, I'm communicating with some of the authors and say, well, I think this to me is not strong. This is strong, like a proper reviewer does. And also the more opponent like people, it's sometimes a bit tense, but they try to be stay polite at least. And it's it's on arguments still, and not just on guts. So yeah, it's very hard to say something about that.
I think this is a very diplomatic answer and a great cliffhanger, because we still... Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Gianpel Dell'Angelo from the Department of Environmental Policy Analysis. Thanks a lot. I think that this is a great presentation. There is a concern that I have, but I think that it's actually addressed in the discussion between natural science and social science. And I'm glad that geologists are taking the concept seriously. And the concern is that from social science, this is a concept that is very apt to be appropriated by certain type of agendas. So actually, you both extensively cited Ellis, who's a dear colleague, but he's also one of the signatories of the Eco-Modernist Manifesto, where the term Anthropocene is widely used, but it's also used and somehow appropriated to propose a certain way forward, which is a way forward for nuclear power energy, GMOs, technological fixes, with a very strong, let's say, neo-Darwinist type of approach, extremely controversial in my opinion. So, how do we ensure that the term Anthropocene doesn't become a sort of a hegemonic term that is then appropriated by a certain type of agenda?
I will answer very quickly. So in my presentation, I said I want to be inclusive to natural sciences data for that reason. So that as soon as it becomes, can also be politicized, you add opinion, or where should we go in the future? What measures should we, how should we deal with each other as within humans? Then I stop in defining it. But it's also easy for me to say, because I'm from natural sciences background, and I may be a bit blind at some point. And I think also it's maybe for this aspect, maybe okay that Ellis withdrew from the working group. So that solved itself in that sense.
Thank you for the question. I also liked Kim's answer. I think, yeah, what you say about eco-modernism, of course, is an important point. So I forgot to add that slide. I think it's important also on Anthropocene debates also to see where people are standing. So, indeed. I guess I take Ellis's research based on his research. So like as Kim is sticking to his earth sciences, I take Earl on his ecological sciences. So I've never actually studied much of his eco-modernism or that part. But it certainly is relevant. It's relevant in the debate, especially when it goes for future measurements and future implications. For my reaction also, my back question also to Kim is that the Anthropocene, I always favored. Actually, I don't care that much anymore. I'm so much driven away from the earth side. I don't care anymore whether they call it Anthropocene or not, because it's just there, and we just have to deal with it. And much of the earth scientists are very monodisciplinary, and they don't even want to look interdisciplinary, so that excludes them also from that part. So yeah. Not sure if I answered your question in that sense.
If you to narrow it down to a voting and something by a commission and to accept it within geology, I think they can accept including natural science data or kind of observational era data sets if they are observing the Earth system primarily. And then where does that stop? Maybe yes, with the proportion of urban area and urban land use and those kind of things. But at some point, they will also cut it off. And then that body they will use to accept it or not. And then there will still be a whole world out of it beyond it, also dealing with present, also using the Anthropocene that is maybe a little bit helped, but not so much helped, but not fully helped basically with this. It will not be solved by this issue that you raise, will not be solved by defining it or not defining it, I think.
Right, thank you very much. Really interesting stuff. Sjoerd Blondeel, also of the IVM, and maybe a little bit of a follow-up to what Jean-Paul was saying, and perhaps also what Philipp was saying. If you're the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, say you're a policymaker who's confronted with a real-time climate crisis, I'm going to be very blunt here. Why should you care about when exactly you're defining the start or whatever, the moment that the Anthropocene actually becomes global? And I guess it kind of comes to what you were saying, and I find it really interesting that you say, I'm a natural scientist, I do the natural sciences, and that's it. That's my job. And perhaps there are scientist rebels here in the room, I don't know, that perhaps have a different perspective on that, and I'd love to see what other people think about your position on what the role of a scientist can and should be.
You first? Yeah, me first. Yeah, okay. Thank you for your question. I think indeed, you said, why should we care indeed about this if it's already there? And I said also in my response first that actually I mean 5 years ago I was very much on the debate on the group, and now once a year I meet Kim, I ask him what's the status. So it's just it's a different way of going about the Anthropocene, just realizing that it has the impact it has so broad in a society and makes almost the discussion irrelevant. I was actually surprised to find out that there is interdisciplinarity in the sciences and also very monodisciplinary ways of attributing this. So,
Yeah, if you are the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, you still want to know the rates at which your country is drowning. This is actually measured with satellites, non-geological methods. It's a little bit the background rate studied by geological meanings. And that's it for the sea level rise component. If you also are interested at the same time in the ecology of your drowning island state, also there, it's mostly studied by counting fish and counting corals and assessing their health status. A little bit by what was the natural situation, so that we have a reference to compare the present state of it. And that's how it's, and very little of that is through geological data. A lot of it is from other, what I call natural sciences. I will allow biology also in the natural sciences. Yeah, and therefore I agree with you that it's not so important when it exactly starts, because these communities, they work on a time scale. They don't call periods, unlike very deep in the geological time. But the articles that they write, they use this word, Anthropocene conditions of ecology in Vanuatu. And there you want a bit of clearance that it would. So I agree with the working group and with that would be better if it's a clear term, because you need a bit of a word for a period anyway. So there is some. It clears up something that potentially now can be used also to mask all kinds of things. You can call the last 5,000 years Anthropocene. And then you say, oh, it's not changed so much by ourselves. It's our predecessors that caused this mess or something.
I agree with that, indeed. The 70 years or the 80 years period is much more relevant than the 5,000 years. And it's in original hypothesis I had that it would actually also make people more knowledgeable of the fact that they were actually contributing to this fact. But that's, of course, to be debated. I had one question to you, Kim, also based on a recent paper by Phil Gibbard, you know very well from the UK. He said, why shouldn't we just leave out the dating of the epoch, the GCP, GCSA, but call it don't call it an epoch, call it an event, call it an Anthropocene event, which can just be parallel to the Holocene. What would you say of that?
Yeah, I think it will do. So my previous answer is, if you define it isochronically, you clear up more, and then after that you police it a little bit. That term, that's what reviewers do, and they say, well, you are not using it the way that it's defined or something. In the proposal of Gibbard, you do not have to vote, basically. And maybe there are good reasons to not wanting to vote. That's this, because it gives the wrong signal. It's a wrong signal if geologists approve the present. That's part of his motivation, I think, and maybe I know, or I sense at least. And but on the other, if we as geologists will give a vote that it's an event that is diachronic and it's not a real new time period, that would also be wrong. So it's maybe a bit of a way out. But if that is put to a vote, then I think you get the same wrong message that he wants to get out of, basically. So I think it's so that will not be up for voting. Only the vote of the Anthropocene working, or the proposal of the Anthropocene working group, will be voted upon.
Okay, is there one more question, or are we on? Okay, one more, and then I think we can close, and there might be some time for more unofficial, unrecorded discussion.
Hi there, thank you. Thank you for your lectures. My name is Caroline Kreisel. I'm an environmental historian working at the Athena Institute. I have sort of two unfinished observations. One is about the necessity for certainty in such definitions as the Anthropocene, where I, as a historian, would sort of observe that the sort of need that society demands for like scientific certainty for certain concepts or proof for certain changes in the environment has also been abused to work against climate action. So I would be interested to hear from you, Kim, how that features in your work, or whether geologists are interacting with such debates or criticisms of science. And the second one also comes from a background in history, which is basically, to me, the Anthropocene, when I think about it in my own work as a historian, is kind of alien, because I think it defies the many disconnects that exist in historical time and societal change. So I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but yeah, it's an observation that I'm curious about the disconnects and how we can, how historical knowledge or other types of research that accounts for those disconnects can come back in the Anthropocene work you are doing.
Yeah, the precision thing first. This is sensed. This is why they don't want 1952, because although that would be more precise if you really use plutonium, etc., but then round it off to 1950, because it signals that there is some arbitrariness in where you exactly begin it, and also some practicality, actually. Just do a round number, please, because it's easier for producing graphs, etc. Right? And it's okay to be pragmatic, I feel. And the second thing is this disconnect. Yeah, but the argument of starting the Anthropocene at the great acceleration is that there is a little bit of disconnect here and there, but there is also a huge amount of alignment of all kinds of developments, probably the most alignment that they could find after if they would start at Industrial Revolution, it was more spread. If they would not use population, but only carbon dioxide, or not use, I don't know, war, but only farming or something, then it would be different. But because so many things align around that time frame, that's their argument to put it there as the least worst of all the solutions, basically.
Not sure I can answer your question because you're an environmental historian, as you said. And I think, yeah, so one observation then maybe countering your observation is that listening to Kim's story, it occurred to me, although I wasn't a neuroscientist myself, how isolated they are. They're very isolated in their own discipline, this framing this Anthropocene layer. I think in your data set, you have much more data to study the Anthropocene, and much more about, especially environmental history, depending, of course, on the period you're in. You can almost go completely independent from the neuroscience and studying it. Although it would be interesting, of course, to connect to other disciplines, like I explained in my story. Yeah.
So I think we are coming to an end. I don't want to break off the discussion, but maybe you can ask our speakers also after we turn out the video. I want to say thanks a lot. It was fascinating. This was a really great start. I know also because you're still here, not outside, so it must have interested you a bit. So we can keep it like this for the other things we have, and we will move towards some of the questions that came up. So what to do and what are the intricacies of doing that? My final observation is a very personal one. As I'm a political scientist, I'm fascinated that we talk about science. At the end, you are voting. I think that's just phenomenal. Thanks a lot.